all began. The mass consumer revolution, the dream of personal mobility. The moving assembly line was the driving force that put America on wheels and forever transformed the way we live and work. It happened almost overnight. At the turn of the century in America's crowded cities, transportation was creating a different form of pollution than we know today.
The horses did their thing on the street, so there was tons of excrement to get rid of in the cities every single day. Horses died by the thousands in the big cities, and usually their owners would just unhitch them from their wagon or carriage or cart and just leave them there for the public authorities to remove, and that was a health problem.
America was ready for another way to get around.
I couldn't believe that anything could run without a horse in front of it. Goes up in front, he's grinding and grinding. All of a sudden, some boom, boom, big cloud of smoke come out the back end, and it started to go. There was this enormous bang and backfire first, and smoke that scared the hell out of me, and I didn't know which way to run to first. What kind of a monster was this that made smoke come out the back and would move, you know?
We just sat in that car and we looked out at the landscape as though we had never seen it 150 times before, because it was so wonderful, and we were going so fast, 18 or 20 miles an hour.
The car had its origin in Europe before the turn of the century. Soon it took hold in America, where skilled mechanics and carriage makers began mounting crude engines on horseless buggies. But cars were out of the reach of most people. These new handcrafted toys were the playthings of the rich. There was Winton, Locomobile, Olds, and Duryea. Literally hundreds of car makers catering to this new market.
My first memory is two elderly women who were upper class riding in electric cars, and they lifted a rod or something, and they would turn, and it would go about 10 miles an hour or 15, but boy, that was a sight. And they were so imperious in their looks, and so the car also had that imperial look.
Nothing has spread socialistic feelings in this country more than the use of automobiles, warned Woodrow Wilson while president of Princeton University. They are a picture of arrogance and wealth. Resentments aside, the car was capturing the public's imagination. But these new toys were not yet trusted as a reliable means of transportation. To prove that their products actually worked, some automakers performed reliability runs, traversing the unpaved continent from coast to coast.
Johnny O'Connor owned an automobile. He took his sweetheart for a ride last Sunday.
America's first auto competition was won by the Duryea brothers, who in 1896 became the first commercially successful American automakers.
Everything needed repair, so he got out and got under, got out and got under.
They represent the dreams of mobility for mankind. We had spaces to cover where tracks couldn't go, and the advantages of transportation that was within the control of the individual seeking the transport was something that appealed to Americans. And then, of course, speed.
The American public turned out in droves to watch racers like Louis Chevrolet, William K. Vanderbilt, and Henry Ford compete on dirt tracks.
Auto racing is essential in the promotion of the early automobile industry and the popularity of cars. And I think the whole sport of auto racing has sustained a certain idea about what the car is. It's a masculine object, and you can tempt fate. You can be brave. You can be athletic in your car. All these things are still essential images and appeals that the automakers use to sell cars.
As car makers tried to reach out to the wider middle-class market, America had one great advantage.
Discoveries of oil in Oklahoma and Texas in the second decade of this century meant that the price of oil in this country would be very cheap for many years to come. And that certainly makes mass automobility much more possible in this country than it was in other places where basically the fuel had to be imported from elsewhere.
As a mass market emerged, many of the smaller car makers fell by the wayside. In the years to come, just a few would dominate the American auto industry. In 1904, Ransom Olds was the largest producer of cars. By 1908, William C. Durant founded the General Motors Corporation. But that same year, one of the most controversial figures in industrial history would market the car that changed the world.
Little old Ford, ramble right along, and the little old Ford, ramble right along. The gas ran out in the big machine, but the darned little Ford don't need gasoline.
Henry Ford proclaimed the Model T a car for the great multitude.
It was Spartan. It was cheap. It was reliable. It was cantankerous. It was everything. It was a mirror of American society in many ways. The Model T made motoring a mass practice rather than an elite practice.
Right along, when the power gets big, just hit it with a brick, and the little Ford will ramble right along.
The Model T is the most important car ever produced. Americans today probably can't even imagine the extent to which the car got cheaper over time. Ford ends up selling the Model T in the mid-1920s for less than $300, fully equipped, new.
The key was mass production. In 1913, the Ford Motor Company flipped the switch on the automobile moving assembly line. It ushered in an era of mass production and mass consumption unparalleled in history. The moving assembly line put America on wheels and totally transformed the nature of industrial work. But there was a price to pay.
And there was really a bargain at the Port Highland Park plant, a devil's bargain between the most extraordinary efficiency imaginable as a result of the assembly line and a work process that so tied people to the line. Overnight, with the introduction of the assembly line, you became part of that machine. All of a sudden, not a second of your time was under your control. You were working next to people where there wasn't time to talk, even if you did speak their language. All of that put together gave a work situation that the world had never seen before.
It demanded a devouring kind of constant attention. I mean, that line kept rolling. It kept rolling, and somebody had to man it. With dull, boring, repetitive, mind-shriveling jobs.
While once skilled craftsmen put together individual cars, now unskilled workers performed simple, repetitive tasks on thousands of cars as they came down the line. This required a new way of managing labor, a way earlier pioneered by Frederick W. Taylor. Taylor's theory was called scientific management. His time-motion studies pitted workers against the clock with ruthless precision. One task was performed over and over again. Movement and thought were reduced to a minimum. He wrote, "A worker should be no smarter than an ox."
Taylor targeted the destruction of craft work and the introduction of highly regimented work. Frederick W. Taylor is the patron saint of the assembly line. If there were justice and fairness to Taylor's memory, there'd be a statue of Taylor in front of every auto assembly plant.
Taylor's ideas influenced Henry Ford, who sought total control over every aspect of production. Coupled with scientific management, Ford's moving assembly line resulted in extraordinary efficiency. Within 2 years, production capacity at Highland Park more than doubled. Workers flooded into Detroit from around the country and around the world. Automakers attempted to get the U.S. Department of Immigration to send new arrivals to the area. For black and white workers in the South, Detroit held out the hope of well-paying jobs and a new life. But they were in for a surprise.
These were people who came from all over Europe, from South and America, from other areas. They were used to hard work, but no one had ever seen the work that was entailed in the assembly line in terms of its discipline and ruthlessness. So they left almost as fast as they came.
In an attempt to reduce a turnover rate of almost 400%, Ford made a move that shook the entire auto industry. In 1914, he doubled the prevailing wage to $5 a day. Other car makers labeled him a traitor to his class. But around the world, Ford instantly became a millionaire folk hero. Immediately, there was a deluge of workers in front of the Highland Park plant.
Thousands lined up in bitter cold in January trying to get into the factory where that $5 day was available. People were willing to endure anything to get near those jobs and what they saw as a fundamentally different possibility for life.
Overnight, Ford's turnover rate dropped from almost 400% to 54%, and his profit margin increased. Later, Ford would portray the $5 day as the working man's road to consumer society, in particular as a way to buy cars.
Let me tell you, not only the workers in the plant had their eye on making a down payment on a Ford car, but farm folks with very low incomes across the country looked upon Henry Ford as a man who was building a car they could afford.
Ford's marketing campaigns targeted rural America, promoting the Model T as superior to the horse and buggy, a vehicle that would make rural life easier.
When the car got the farmer out of the mud, there was a general belief in society that farm life would now become a very attractive option for all those poor, huddled, wretched masses living in the factory tenements of the big cities, and that more and more of them would move back into this improved rural agricultural existence on the farm. Well, it turned out just the opposite.
Before they had the Model T, they'd stay at home and work, and then when they got the car, they'd run into town 3 times a day. It kind of ruined them.
The young guys, they didn't want to farm, and if they could afford the car, they took off and went to the cities with them.
In the city, cars were creating a new kind of anarchy on the streets.
Once you get lots of cars being produced, there is competition in the streets between the older horse-drawn vehicles, the existing trolley networks, and these new cars. And clearly, a couple of them are going to go. The way early silent films portray this in terms of car chases and near misses, in fact, reflects the sort of tension that's out there in the streets.
Cities are struggling to find almost any way to accommodate the arts. But their starting point is that you must accommodate the city to the car. You don't expect drivers to do very much to conform their habits to the city.
Safety became a major concern. In the mid-1920s, most states didn't even require a license to drive.
One time, me and my sister was on a streetcar, and we came to a stop, and this car was supposed to stop for the streetcar, but he didn't do that. So this guy in front of me stepped out, and he just got pulverized.
Civic group protested against the rising number of auto accidents. Safety now had to be calculated into the social cost of the car.